My name is Michael. My educational background is that I have an undergraduate degree in English literature with honors and also in classics from Stanford. Then I did a master's in creative writing. I really specialize in helping students write their essays specifically. So I have about 8 or 9 years now of experience working with college applicants, transfer applications, high school applications, and graduate school applications as well. Um, and as for the students that I've worked with, they've been accepted to lots of different colleges. I know just in this past cycle, those included Columbia, Cornell, UC Berkeley, UPenn. In other cycles, Harvard and Yale have been a couple of the schools that my students have been accepted to. And then, a range of other schools as well. I've worked with students on applications to Tulane, University of Michigan, Texas Austin are some pretty popular schools to apply to, it seems, these days. Vanderbilt, Duke, so I've got a lot of experience with a lot of different applications. MIT and Stanford, of course, are a couple big ones. So I have experience with a lot of different applications and advising people about how to approach both the Common App personal statement and also the supplemental essays for a lot of different schools. And that's mostly what I would help people on here. So I'm going to be moving pretty quickly through a lot of content, but in that time, I'll try to address how I generally advise students to approach the UC personal insight questions, how to approach the MIT essays, how to approach the Common App personal statement, I think the Stanford supplemental essays as well. So basically just kind of thinking about the different written components of your potential applications. So let me share my screen again. So a few things just thinking generally. When you're approaching your essays and thinking about how you want to represent yourself in your writing that colleges are going to see, you want to think about these things. You want to think about conveying your academic interests. That's top of the board here, because after all, you have to remember that you're applying to academic institutions. So when I advise students about how to write the personal statement, for example, which I think of as the centerpiece of the written application, I often advise students to try to tell the story of what formative experiences helped you develop your driving academic interest or your passion. I think that's a good idea, like I said, because you're writing to a very specific audience of readers who's evaluating whether you belong at their academic institution. But of course, universities are more than just classes and academics. So you want to more broadly show that you're a good match and for a particular school. And so that's often something you can convey more through the supplemental essays for the specific school than through the Common App personal statement that goes to all of the different schools. And so some things you might touch on are, what are your values and how do your values line up with the values of the school as you understand them? What's your personality like? What are your curiosities? What are some resources that the school has that might help you pursue those curiosities or develop your personality in ways that you're interested in developing? And then beyond that, you also want to maybe touch on some of your extracurricular activities. One of the ways that I frame, or advise students to think about their college application is that, you want to frame your college experience as a natural continuation of your high school one. So I'm already doing all these things. I'm already interested in all these things. Your school seems to have resources that would allow me to continue to develop my interests and hobbies and research and all that kind of stuff. Okay. So for rising seniors, the goal is to create the most compelling application and showcase who you are. Again, you'll notice even between the last couple slides in this one, a lot of language about your personality, your identity, right? Even the UCs ask personal insight questions. That's the title that they give to their essays, right? Personal insight. Give us insight about who you are. Give us insight about your personality, your values. So you really want to use your essays to showcase who you are. And I think some students come into the college application process with misconceptions about the real goals of their essays. I think sometimes there's a big pressure to try to impress with your essays, and to prove you are qualified, or that you are smart, or that you have accomplishments. And really, it's your resume that's going to show all those things, and your teacher recommendations, your grades, things like that. The essays, increasingly, are a chance to represent who you are as a person, in some broader way. And so, we focus a lot about, I will ask students a lot about their favorite classes, their most memorable experiences in whatever extracurricular activity they're involved in. A lot of the work is actually kind of thinking back on your experiences and then trying to represent those experiences on the page and explain how those experiences have shaped you, both as a person and then as a student, and as an intellectual. And then one thing to remember as you're crafting your applications is the average review time. So, while you want your piece to be a polished piece of writing, you also need to understand that at schools like Northwestern, for example, they spend 5 minutes per application reviewing your writing. So there's sometimes a danger of like overthinking the writing, where you don't want to create something that like a reader would need to read twice to even like understand your artistry and how you put together this statement. Instead, you want to write a compelling narrative where readers can read it through from top to bottom really smoothly. They don't need to reread anything. There are no points of confusion. There are no points at which the writing is unclear, because it's very easy to lose a reader when they only have a really limited time like this to review your application. All right. So next thing we'll talk about is how to approach the UC personal insight questions. So UC asks you to answer 4 of these questions, and so you want to pick 4 that help you show the different facets of your personality. For the UC applications, you won't submit the Common App personal statement. You just submit 4 shorter essays. And so generally, since the personal statement is, as I was saying before, kind of the centerpiece of the application and the aspect of your written application that you would start with, you can generally adapt your personal statement to answer one of these questions. So that's kind of, your personal statement will be 650 words. This will be 350 words. So you're going to kind of cut down you'll cut down your personal statement to serve as an answer to one of these questions. And then beyond that, the other good news about the UC personal insight questions is that a lot of these prompts overlap with supplemental essay prompts for other colleges. One of the most common supplemental essay prompts, I think, is number 7. What have you done to make your school or your community a better place? Basically, community is the keyword from this prompt, and we've bolded it here. A lot of schools will ask in a supplemental essay, tell us about a community that's been meaningful to you. What's your role been in it? How has it, fostered your personal growth? Something like that. So, I advise students generally 7's a pretty good prompt to pick, because you might be able to recycle that content for other schools. And then for a lot of these prompts, I kind of tell students to think about it a little bit differently than you might naturally if you just read the language of the prompt, like this one. What have you done to make your school, your community a better place? It kind of sounds like they're asking you to shape this story where maybe you'll brag a little bit, like I did this thing and like my community was instantly better for it. And I often advise people to just think about a community that has been meaningful to you, or think about something you did in your community that helped you understand your community better or feel more like a part of your community. And then tell the story about how those experiences were personally significant for you. And if along the way, probably along the way, you did something to make your school or community a better place. So I always advise students focus more on telling the story of your personal experience, because that's what you know the best after all. And sometimes, like I find quite frequently, students will narrate, for example, an experience tutoring or volunteering, and they want the takeaway of their story to be like, it made me feel so good to know that I'd made such a huge difference in this person's life. But the problem with that takeaway is you're not that person. You actually don't really know the difference you've made in that person's life. You're sort of just assuming you've made that difference. And so it's better, I think, if you can just focus more on your own personal experience. And then you can humbly hope that you have made a difference in somebody else's life, or in your community, and you can hope to help steer your community in a new direction. But often also change takes time. So you also don't want to oversimplify a narrative to the point where readers sense some falseness in it. And you should acknowledge that you're one person, maybe working together as a team, but still, like, you're hopeful you've made some difference, and you're hopeful that that change might be continued in the future or something like that. Similarly, like, what would you say is your greatest talent or skill? I'll just give kind of one more brief example of this before we move on. What would you say is your greatest talent or skill? How have you developed and demonstrated that talent over time? I advise people to focus much more on the second part of the question. How have you developed and demonstrated? Really just developed that talent over time. So, if somebody says, I'm a really amazing piano player, I wouldn't advise them to focus too much on convincing me how good they are, but I would rather ask them questions like, what skill as a piano player have you been working on lately? Can you give me an example of a piece you've learned to play that really challenged you? And what did you struggle with when you were first learning to play that piece? And how frequently did you practice? What strategies did you adopt to overcome those challenges? And how did you then develop as a pianist more broadly as a result of those challenging experiences? Again, those four responses, they work in tandem a little bit, and you should probably write one, perhaps two of those essays about your primary academic interest. But then beyond that, you also want to use some of the other prompts to round out your personality and round out your application. So the core of the college application is really the personal statement and the essays more broadly. And so here's kind of, I guess, a three-step version of that process, where when we work on essays together, we would start with brainstorming. And as I said, during a brainstorming session, I'll be asking lots of questions about specific experiences, trying to prompt students to recall what are the particular moments that made them excited about whatever. And that's useful for a couple of reasons. One, the more specific you can be in talking about your experiences, the more you'll stand out from other students who might have the same interests as you, but they can't speak about it as specifically or as vividly. Two, just in a narrative sense, I advise people in most of the essays to start with an opening scene that is supposed to hook the reader. And by asking students about specific experiences and memorable experiences they've had, I can often help students to figure out what kind of scene they might want to write to hook readers in. Like, I remember a really strong opening scene in the past where I was asking a student who was into science. I forget exactly which of the sciences, but he was into science, and I was asking him, like, well, can you remember any particular labs that stand out to you where you found them the most fascinating? And the student recalled one particular lab that they were doing, and it had something to do with like burning peanuts or something like that. And so I was asking the student, like, well, what do you really remember about that day? Like, can you recall sensory details that would make the scene memorable? And they kind of recalled like the smell of the burning peanuts, and that ended up being a really compelling opening scene that could really draw readers in, because it was full of these really specific and vivid sensory details. So we'll do some brainstorming, and again, that goes beyond just like trying to structure the essay, like what should go in what paragraph, but it involves that kind of really much more personal sort of brainstorming where I'm asking students about their particular experiences. What are those experiences that have helped you develop your academic passion? What are the formative experiences you've had in classes and clubs and internships, with your family, with your friends, in your community? There's lots of different experiences, and sometimes students, don't know which ones they should pick, first of all. So we have to kind of think about, like, which experiences should you represent here as you seek to represent yourself best to colleges. And then even once we've decided on, what experiences do we want to talk about? Okay, well, what aspects of those experiences, what moments do we want to put on the page? And what's the narrative that you want to tell about your personal change over time? So all those things go into the brainstorming. Sorry. And then there's, obviously how to represent everything on paper. And I'm happy to work with students as they're writing their essays too. Like I was saying, it's so important that these essays really be polished and easy to read for reviewers who have so little time. And so, we really go through every sentence meticulously, trying to hone each sentence, make sure that it is as clear as can be, and make sure that the transitions make logical sense between, every paragraph, make sure that the details stand out and are memorable and fresh, and that there's nothing that's vague that could be specified. We're really going through finally each essay, each sentence, and trying to figure out how to best represent everything. And then, of course, final edits, so once there's a draft of an essay that's fully in place, then we can go through together and take a look at, is there anything, we can do in the end here to really just get this essay ready to go, ensure that it's ready for admissions readers. And in general, I'm happy to look at, in general, the editing process is dynamic, as I was trying to suggest there, that we're editing as we go along. But I'm also happy to, take, even if that last read through your essay takes me 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and I'm only suggesting like 3 things, I'm happy to just go through and make those final suggestions, and then, hear back from you like, oh, okay, I've made those suggestions, anything else to take a look at? All right. So I'll share quickly the Common App personal statement prompts as we talk about the personal statement here. But I'm not going to keep this, I'm not going to keep these prompts up for very long, because the truth is that I really advise people to not even really think about these prompts. The way that I put it is like, these prompts are not for you. These prompts are for people who really have no idea what to write about, and maybe they're throwing together an application last minute. Really, the way you should approach the personal statement is to tell the most compelling story possible about the formative experiences that have made you interested in whatever you are interested in. In general, I have, and then if you do that, you'll touch on probably elements of many of these prompts. Like, some students have a background, identity, interest, or talent that's meaningful. Well, maybe your, personal identity or your background has something to do with your driving academic interest. If so, then you've touched on background, identity, interest, and certainly you're talented at whatever you're doing. The lessons we take from obstacles we encounter can be fundamental to later success. Recount the time when you faced a challenge is one of the prompts. Well, if you're writing about how you've developed your primary academic interest, surely you've faced some challenges and setbacks along the way. So probably you'll discuss that at some point in your story. Maybe you needed to make a jump from when you were a kid and you really liked Legos, and then you started to get into your robotics club or something like that, right? And you had to build a robot for a competition. Well, obviously it's going to be harder to build that robot for a competition than it was to put together a Lego set. So then you're going to discuss the challenges you inevitably face as you begin to practice whatever your craft is or whatever your passion is more seriously. So a lot of these things you'll end up discussing, discuss an accomplishment, event, or realization that sparked a period of personal growth. Well, maybe if we're using that same story as an example of young aspiring engineer who develops their passion for engineering through, robotics or something like that, Maybe you build a really successful robot and there's the accomplishment or event or realization that helped you understand more precisely what you want to do in the future, something like that. So that just covers a little bit about the personal statement and how I advise approaching it. Okay. So just moving on, since we've got only a few minutes left. Here's some student feedback, which people can probably look through on their own time, but how to approach the MIT essays. MIT, you need to answer a few short essay questions in not very many words. So MIT's word restriction is a lot harsher than most schools. But one thing that MIT has made explicit, I think they even say this in their prompts, is they say something like, like be genuine in responding to these questions. Like, we really want to understand who you are as a person. Note, what field of study appeals to you the most right now. Again, you really want to make sure that you are conveying whatever your academic interest is to the school, and that you talk about the experiences that you've actually had that lead you to believe this is the right field for you. Tell us more about why this field of study at MIT appeals to you. Here, you shouldn't be abstract, right? Well, I find math is just the most interesting to me and I'm good at it. And right, all those things, that's just general. It's not going to help schools get a sense of who you are. But if you can say, well, I did this project the summer after my junior year, and this was challenging, but this was fascinating. In the end, I came out of it knowing that I wanted to learn more about this. That's a lot more specific. But again, MIT wants to know you more broadly too. Tell us something you do simply for the pleasure of it. How has the world you come from shaped your dreams and aspirations? The bottom line here for all of these questions is that the more of your personal experiences you can get on the page, the better. And then finally, these I think are good to look at just because a lot of the principles apply to other schools. Schools want to know that you can collaborate with others. And schools want to know that you're going to be a good community member. So if you can talk about group experiences you've had where you successfully navigated challenges with other group members, that's always going to be a plus for colleges. Okay, so maybe just two other things here, commonly asked questions. I think I've touched on this one a little bit. I recommend that students write their personal statement first, and then they build their supplemental essays around it. And I mean, it's right in the name. They're supplemental essays. For me, you can think of them as supplemental to the personal statement. The personal statement is the centerpiece. You should build your supplemental essays around it. So don't worry, like some students will worry, like, but what if I say this in my personal statement? I won't be able to write about it in my supplemental essays. That's fine. Prioritize writing the strongest possible personal statement, then write your supplemental essays around it. I think the rising seniors should start working on their essays now. I think you should start working on your personal statement as soon as possible, and try to have your personal statement completely done by the time you start senior year, basically. Maybe if there are experiences from the summer that you want to write about in your personal statement, you can wait to write one paragraph of it until after you have those experiences, but I'd advise writing as soon as possible. Especially because by the time you get to supplemental essays, a lot of schools have why do you want to go to this school prompts, and those require a pretty good amount of research if you want to write a legitimately good one. And so you'll have a lot of research to do in the fall. You want to get the personal statement out of the way before you have to tackle those supplemental essays. And then, are there assignments after each class, and what expectations do I have for students? So in my experience, sessions with students on Zoom work best if we use them to brainstorm for future essays and to then review content that students have already written. And so the best possible workflow is that coming out of our sessions, students are clear on what they should write. So if we've just brainstormed something, they should be responsible for writing new paragraphs outside of the session, and then bringing fresh content to the next session so that we can look at that together. And I can give them feedback and we can go through and make edits if we need to and things like that. So yes, I generally have the expectation that students do a significant amount of writing work outside of the sessions themselves. And then finally, I think we've got like 1 minute. So I'll briefly touch on the Stanford essays here in closing. Stanford asks a few short essays and then a bunch of short questions. So here, I'll stop sharing at the end here. But the biggest thing in approaching the Stanford questions, I think, is that the answers to your questions should be coordinated in some way to present a coherent picture of who you are. So if you're applying as like, in my case, I was applying as a classics major. Like I tried to theme some of my answers accordingly. So when they asked like, what historical moment do you wish you could have witnessed? I think I wrote about like, oh, I wish I could have witnessed the assassination of Julius Caesar, and I would have loved to know like what he actually said to Brutus, if anything, or something like that. But you should theme your answers a little bit based on what your interests are and how you're applying. So that's my advice about how to approach those Stanford essays.